My guest today is award-winning journalist Campbell Brown, host of the CNN primetime program that bears her name. She's been a White House correspondent and substitute nightly news anchor for NBC, spending 11 years with the network. She joined CNN in 2007, where she's been covering major headlines, including the epic presidential campaign of 2008 and the election of President Barack Obama. So, Campbell, welcome to Give and Take.
Thanks, Julie. It's good to be here.
So on the CNN website, your bio boldly touts you as the only nonpartisan cable news host in the 8 p.m. hour. Now, 10 years ago, such a statement would, of course, been a given because obviously journalists were independent. What is your take on the fact that CNN, the pioneer in cable news, is really marketing your political independence to distinguish itself from its competitors?
Wow. You're right. Things have changed quite a bit. I just think it's the world we live in, and there's no real metric to measure us by, because CNN is the only one who's still doing journalism. I mean, I don't mean that as a criticism of what the other guys are doing. It's just we're comparing apples and oranges. Fox has made a choice to go in one direction. MSNBC has made a choice to go in the other direction. And for me, as a journalist, that's all I know. That's who I am. That's what I grew up to be, you know, from my very first job through my time at NBC. I was mentored by Tim Russert and Tom Brokaw. I don't know how to do anything else, so I wouldn't be comfortable anywhere else. And I'm grateful that CNN is committed still to this. You know, it is frustrating that there isn't real competition in journalism. But look, I get it. I recognize the world we live in. Ratings are really important. You are, in all likelihood, going to get a bigger rating when you do opinion rather than straight news, because you have a built-in audience. I mean, there are a lot of people who want to be in an echo chamber and want their views validated. So, you know, you see that with Fox and with MSNBC. They have an automatic punching bag, you know, if you will, and they have a loyal audience who wants to hear that perspective.
So what is the future of traditional journalism?
I wish I could tell you. I don't. Traditional journalism, I don't even know how to define that anymore. And this isn't just about opinion either. I mean, this is about how much the internet and social media has changed the process, which, by the way, I think is a great thing. I think we have a much stronger connection with the audience than we ever have before, because they are a part of the process. We get instant feedback. I mean, literally, like during the show, we have a live blog, and you know, I get instant feedback. I can go on during the commercial and see what people...
But is that ever a bad thing, this whole onslaught of social media? Like, for example, sources. Obviously, with the onslaught of social media, it makes it easier to have sources, but does it lower the standard of the sources?
Well, I think the first time we really saw that in a way that I thought, wow, this is going to get interesting, was in Iran, because we had no other way to cover the story. But I don't think CNN is relying on that. I don't think they ever would. I mean, if you look at our news organization, as others have been shrinking, CNN has been growing internationally, and we've got people all over the world. That hasn't changed. I mean, the way we go about it has become more efficient because everything's digital now, and you don't need 10 people to do a camera shoot in the same way that, you know, you know that, certainly, that we used to. But journalism is still there in terms of our kind of operating philosophy and the people that CNN hires and how we go about it. So I don't think we're necessarily relying on social media as the way to get information, but I do think it forces me as an anchor or a reporter or a journalist to engage with people more, and to listen when people say, you know what, this is what we think is important, in a way that's very different from the voice of God anchor that, you know, was what Brokaw and Jennings and Dan Rather were, and certainly Walter Cronkite in many ways. So that's changed. Now, do I have to respond to it just because somebody says, I want more on Octomom, you know, and something else is going on that's our real story? Then we make those choices as journalists. those editorial choices based on our experience and our training.
Let's talk about Octomom. I never thought I would say that, but let's talk about that for a minute, because there seems to be almost a prurient interest in those kinds of stories, or stories about crime, or missing children, or mothers who are missing. What do you think that means for society? Are you at all concerned that some of the more serious policy issues, the cap and trade bill, if you will, or other healthcare debate, is really getting swallowed up in this whole concept of these other kinds of stories that are out there?
I mean, I think that's what you're talking about. Look, there's a balance, because you cover the news at the same time you don't want to be above the news. As a mother, I'm sure you can relate to this. I was fascinated by Octomom the first few days, and then it was time to move on.
Right.
So, but for the first couple of days, I was just, wildly curious. I wanted to understand
why someone would do that.
Why someone would do this.
Right.
And what happens to those children. I mean, there's a lot of empathetic stuff going on, and it's hard not to respond to that. So we covered it for a couple of days, and then it got to the point of turning into a circus, and I think that's when my show, because, moves on. Now, there are other shows that specialize in that, and that's what they do. It's not what we do. I don't like the missing girl of the week, story. It for a million reasons, but I don't. But at the same time, Michael Jackson, maybe you could use that as an example, is a story that millions of people found enormously fascinating, and including myself, and we covered it. And did we go overboard? I don't know. I don't want to be above the news either. When there is something that is attracting that level of interest, I want to cover it.
Do you think though, that it was really a media creation? I mean, the wall-to-wall coverage for 1 week that seemed to supersede so many important public policy issues. President Obama was in Russia. There was very little coverage of that.
It's a balance. And here's what I would say, is I'm very lucky that I have a boss who says, okay, and look, I don't want to be Pollyannish here. I get that ratings was driving a large part of it. I mean, Michael Jackson got enormous numbers. I mean, just look at the number of people who watched the day of that memorial service. But I have a boss who was literally calling all of us and saying, okay, you've been doing really well with Michael Jackson. I know you're getting a big rating, but there's a lot of other stuff going on in the world and you need to cover it. Now, where else would that have happened? I mean, I'm grateful. To me, that is what CNN is about, that I live in this work environment where that can be the case. And I just want to give you one other example, because this I find just unbelievable, is that we were literally today at CNN asked by a blogger who covers the television news business, CNN is today covering the Sotomayor hearings and MSNBC and Fox News are not. Do you want to put out a statement on why you're covering them? Yes, thank you. I mean, it was like, are you kidding me? Because
maybe
we're a news organization.
Why they're not covering them.
Well, I mean, but that's what it's come to. It's like we have to justify why we are covering the confirmation hearings for a Supreme Court nominee.
But doesn't that concern you? I mean,
yes.
when I was growing up, every single night I watched with my parents McNeil Lehrer Hour, every single night, and it was formative for me. It caused my interest in politics. I certainly worry for my kids that this whole tide of infotainment, if you will, has basically taken over the news business.
Yeah, but we have an obligation as parents to do what I think our parents did, because I had a very similar, upbringing in that my parents were really engaged, and our dinner table was conversation about current events and what was going on in the world, and reading was so integral in our lives that it becomes second nature, and that's obviously why I was drawn to journalism and covering the world. I mean, that was how I was raised. And I don't think we can expect these massive media corporations who run our business now to make these decisions for us. I mean, we gotta control it. There are interesting things springing up that give me hope in many ways. And first of all, let me just say again, CNN, I'm inspired by. But there's this organization called ProPublica, you've probably heard of, that's a nonprofit group, and they have, basically started a foundation to fund journalism, and they're just doing great journalism, and they just put it out there, not for profit, not for ratings, not for anything, but just to put it out there. Great investigative pieces, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that's the direction we're headed. I'm not sure yet. I don't think anybody is. There are many aspects of this that are wild, wild west, right now. As a journalist, my obligation is to try to stay true to my ideals and to how I was trained to look at things critically, objectively, and to try to present things as fairly as I possibly can.